Welcome, everyone. It's delightful to have you here. The reason we're together is to begin our preparations for the holiday. Many years ago, I had a men's group here at the synagogue, and we met a number of times during the year and invited speakers to come talk to us about issues having to do with the lives of men. And one night, we invited Malka Schulweiss, Rabbi Schulweiss's wife, to be our speaker. Mrs. Schulweiss is a therapist, and before that, she was a literature professor at Cal State Northridge, and a very, very deep and wise person. And if you know Mrs. Schulweiss, she's always very, very well presented, and she sort of looks like everybody's grandma. And so she walks into this room with about 100 men, and we all gathered around her after dinner to listen to what she had to say, and this very sweet, kind, gentle grandmother gets up and smashes these guys on the head. She said to them in these words, she said, "Gentlemen, you have to decide. Do you want to live on purpose or do you want to live by accident? Do you live by purpose or do you live by accident?" Most people, she said, live by accident. Most people do not contemplate or meditate or deliberate about the lives they will live. They just sort of let life carry them along. But if you do that, then you reach a point in your middle age when you look back and ask yourself, how did I get here? How did I get here? And where did I want to go? And what happened to me along the way? She said, let's talk about what it means to live with purpose. And that was the talk. I thought that was a brilliant observation. You have to decide if you want to live with purpose or by accident. Most of us live by accident. We muddle through. I mean, how many times I've asked people, what do you do for a living? And they would tell me, and I say, how'd you get into that point? Well, I had a friend who invited me into a business. Or a friend of the family told me to do this. Or I was in college. Is that what you want to be doing? Most people just sort of let life pull them along. And then they get to these points in life, and for some reason they come to see rabbis at these points, with this complaint, which is, how did I get here? And where did I want to be? And how far am I from where I wanted to be to where I am? What is it like to live on purpose? To live deliberately, to live with intention? We have a set of holidays that begin at the end of this month. These holidays come in the fall. And the premise of these holidays is that one takes a deep look at one's life, one meditates on where we've come and where we want to go, and makes intentional choices about the life that we wish to live. The premise, the understood premise of these holidays, however, is this idea that we live on purpose and we live with purpose. And that's what we're going to talk a little about tonight. What does it mean to live with purpose? What does it mean to establish a purpose for one's life? What does it mean to choose a way and to stick with that and to persevere and understand that that's what my life is all about? First, there's just a couple of details so that everyone is on the same page. The Jewish people originated in the Middle East and Israel. The land of Israel, much like California, doesn't have 4 seasons, it has 2. There's a rainy season and a dry season. When the seasons switch, we have a block of holidays. I'll give you just a digression for a minute. Religion typically likes to decorate and to fill with ritual switching moments. So you'll notice that many religions have rituals around doorways. We put up mezuzahs. Muslims paint doorways as sort of aqua green. Buddhists put prayer flags on their doorways. Because doorways are interesting because you're moving from there to here. And in the interim, the split second between, you're sort of nowhere, which is a sort of vulnerable moment. We put ritual on the difference on the switch between night and day, and between day and night. We put ritual around the life cycle moments when a couple is engaged with each other and want to be married. We jump the broom. We stand under the chuppah. we pronounce the words. We send them on a honeymoon to Maui and hope they come home. I mean, we surround these liminal moments, these doorway moments, with ritual. So the Jewish tradition, notice that you have a switch between the dry season and the wet season in the fall, and between the wet season and the dry season in the spring. There's a block of holidays around each one. In the springtime, when we've had a whole winter full of rain, and we're about to begin a lovely spring, summer full of sunshine, we have a bunch of up holidays. We begin with Purim in the early spring. Purim is the happiest holiday of the Jewish year. It's about masks and noisemakers and drunken revelry. It's our Mardi Gras. It's our Carnival. It's our Bacchanalia. It's our frat party. Entire religion celebrates a frat party. Who wouldn't want to be part of such a faith? And then 4 weeks later, we have Passover, which is an up holiday about liberation from slavery and coming into the promised land. And then 7 weeks after that, Shavuot, the holiday that celebrates the giving of the Torah, the giving of Scripture on Mount Sinai. These are holidays which are liberation holidays. They're joyful holidays. In the fall, when we move from the dry season to the wet season, those are holidays also, but they have the exact opposite ethos, the exact pathos, the exact opposite emotion. Because there's a bit of anxiety. The question is it going to rain? Is there going to be enough rain? Because we don't know if there's going to be enough rain. And if there's not enough rain, we're not going to have food. So you have holidays which are deeply serious. You begin with this month of Elul, which is the last month of the Hebrew year. And during this month of Elul, each night, each day, we're supposed to take some time and do some introspection, which we're about to do in a few moments. That's Elul. Then we finish the month of Elul with Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. And unlike the American New Year, which occurs on the 31st and the 1st, the Jewish New Year is a time of deep reflection. It's not a sad holiday, but it's a serious holiday. We don't say Happy New Year. We say Shana Tova, a year of goodness, a good New Year. Let it be a full New Year. Because we're fully aware of the mystery of a new year and what a new year can bring. We're fully aware of the passage of time. And the great tragedy of the passage of time is that none of us can master it. We're all creatures in time, and we have a finite amount of time. And then there are 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and the most holy day of the Jewish year, which is Yom Kippur. Now, the mythology, the mythos of this time is that God opens up a great book in heaven, like an auditor, like an accountant, like an IRS person, and looks down, and there's your name, Feinstein Edward M., Encino, California. And next to my name is written everything I've done this year. In fact, my entire life, right there. And the question is, what did you do in this last year which would merit another year of life? And I have 10 days to litigate that decision. It's Jewish, so you've got to litigate, right? And the question is, what can I do in these 10 days to appeal to the judge, to the auditor, to grant me another year of life? And the three gifts that are given the human being are tshuva, tefillah, and tzedakah. Tshuva means repentance, turning, change, personal development. Tefillah means prayer. And tzedakah means an act of kindness, an act of generosity. And then on Yom Kippur, we come here, and on Yom Kippur, Jews do something which we never, ever, ever do. We confront death. We are a life-obsessed people. The Jewish toast over wine is l'chaim, to life. You cancel any law of the Torah if somebody is sick or somebody's health, well-being, or life depends upon it. We are a life-obsessed people. We're deeply invested in children. That's why all those cars are in a parking lot. Deeply invested in children and new life. But once a year, a Jewish person confronts the deepest, most painful truth of our existence. We're mortal. No one has an infinite number of tomorrows. And so, we take a deep look at ourselves from that perspective. Because from that perspective, all the excuses, all the rationalizations, all the defenses, all the escapes, they all wash away. And the truth of who I am and what I am comes blatantly in my face. On that day, we fast all day, which for Jews is like death. On that day, we're not supposed to wear fancy clothes. You're not supposed to wear shoes because the dead don't wear shoes. You're supposed to wear just something simple on your feet. On that day, the tradition, by the way, is not Armani. The tradition is to wear a kittel. A kittel is a death shroud. Now, just take this in a minute. A Jewish person has the outfit we're going to bury you in, sitting in the end of the closet, hanging in the end of the closet. Once a year, you take it out, dust it off, and put it on. See if it still fits. And you spend 25 hours walking around in the outfit that one day we're going to bury you in. A little morbid? It is, but only for one day. But only for one day. Because confronting a human being with the truth of our mortality is the only way for that human being to take seriously the fact that what life you have is slipping away and needs to be taken with some seriousness. And at the end of the holiday, the last service is called Ne'ilah. It comes at sundown, about 7:30 on Yom Kippur. Synagogue is packed full of people. You're watching the windows. We have stained glass windows. They disappear because the sun goes down. And finally, at the last moment, the shofar, the ram's horn, is blown, and we all heave a huge sigh of relief. We begin a new year together with joy and with celebration. We've been forgiven our sins, we've been forgiven our trespasses, we've been forgiven all of the diversions and digressions from life, and we begin all over again. And then, 4 days later, there's yet another holiday. Another holiday. Yes, another holiday. This one's called Sukkot. And this one is a bittersweet holiday. We actually leave our homes and go outside and live in a booth for 8 days. Because for 8 days we experience the joy of being a creature in nature. And we feast and we share with family our thanks for the gifts and bounties of this life. And on the last day of Sukkot, which is the last day of this block of holidays, we have a holiday called Simchat Torah. We begin the reading of Torah again, and it's a joyful, sweet, silly, goofy holiday where we dance. On Yom Kippur, religion is terribly heavy. On Simchat Torah, at the end of the holidays, we get up and we dance. On Yom Kippur, we fast. On Simchat Torah, we feast. On Yom Kippur, we have dreadful, deep, contemplative prayer. On Simchat Torah, it's fun and sweet and joyful and melodic. That's the whole block of holidays that comes at this time of year. So if you're Jewish or have Jewish friends or worse, Jewish employees, yes, they have all these holidays coming up, right? So kiss your friends goodbye. You won't see them till the end of October because we have all these holidays coming up, and that all begins in about 2 weeks. All right, everybody take a breath. Any questions about all that? That was a lot to lay on you. That wasn't the introduction yet. I haven't started. That was just to wait till the stuff got Xeroxed. All right, any questions? Is that clear so far? Got that? Questions, comments, counter sermons? Well, good. Okay, so now, first thing we need to do is get to know each other. So everybody stand up. Everybody stand up. Put the papers on the chairs. Turn to the people beside you and say, "Welcome, I'm so glad you're here." All right, now indulge me for a moment. Put your arms around your new friends and draw them close. Draw them close, draw them close. Don't sit, stand up. You're going to be sitting for the next 6 weeks. Ready? We recite a blessing for the joy of learning. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu mitzvotav etzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Yaseh shalom, Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom. Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom. Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom. Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh shalom. Yaseh shalom. Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Thank you so much. Please be seated. Now you know, whatever happens tonight, if you like the talk, if you don't like the talk, you'll go home and tell your family you stood next to the nicest smelling Jew from Tarzana. You have an invitation for Rosh Hashanah lunch. See, it worked. Good. Tonight, what I'd like to do is share with you the perspectives of one great Jewish thinker who will help us organize our thoughts about this question, what to do with the rest of your life. And the name of that thinker is Moses Maimonides. Moses Maimonides, Moshe ben Maimon, Moses the son of Maimon, born 1135 in Cordoba, Spain. He was born at a time when the Muslims ruled, the great caliphate of Cordoba, ruled a kingdom that was diverse and powerful and wealthy and beautiful, and welcomed Jews and Christians and philosophers and peoples of all faith into a conversation about the meaning of existence. But in his 13th year, the year of his bar mitzvah, that all changed. The caliphate of Cordoba was involved in a war with the Christians who were trying to retake the Iberian Peninsula. And the caliphate needed manpower, so they brought in shock troops from Berber, from North Africa. Well, those shock troops did their job. They repelled the Christian invaders, but when they finished repelling the Christian invaders, they decided not to return to Berber, but rather to take over the caliphate, and they deposed the caliph and established themselves as rulers of Cordoba and its environs. The Berbers were what we would call fundamentalist Muslims, and they had no truck with people that weren't like them. And so the Jewish community and the Christian community began to leave. And Maimonides' father was a dayan. He was a leader of the community. He was a judge. So he takes his family and they leave. And they go toward North Africa, stopping at various places along the way, in Morocco and in Tunisia. Maimonides goes to medical school in Morocco. He goes to rabbinical school in Tunisia, and finally the family settles outside of Cairo, where he has a gift that in that world was terribly rare. He had a brother who became an international merchant and supported the family. So Moses Maimonides was given the gift of 10 years of postgraduate education, while his brother supported the family. And through those years, through his 20s, he becomes the leading scholar of Judaism in the world. A man of 25 years old is now the leading scholar because he had a brilliant mind, a very powerful way of expressing himself, and because he understood how things were put together. He writes a commentary on the Mishnah, and he begins writing what will be one of his two great works of writing, his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah. The Mishnah Torah is the greatest book of Jewish law ever written, because what he does is take all of the extant Jewish traditions and digest them all into a handy, put into your back pocket, easily to follow, easy to organize guide to how to live a Jewish life. He finishes Mishnah Torah, and instead of celebrating, a tragedy comes to him. His brother's lost at sea in the Indian Ocean. Maimonides spends a year in deep, deep, deep mourning. And after a year of deep, deep mourning, he realizes someone has to support the family, because his brother was supporting everybody. So Maimonides goes back to work. He has a medical education. He gets himself hired as the caliph of Cairo, the caliph's personal physician. By day, he's the personal physician to the most powerful Muslim ruler in the world. By night, he's the most important Jewish scholar in the world. And this is how he lives the rest of his life. He takes on only a very, very few students. One of the students that he took on was a boy named Joseph, who was the son of the chief rabbi of Tunisia. And Joseph becomes his acolyte, his disciple, learning philosophy with him. Because Maimonides understands that philosophy is a language by which he can prove the truth of his faith. And that whenever Jews are faced with a challenge to their faith, he would offer a philosophical defense of the faith that would be so compelling that Jews would never again be perplexed, be confused. But as luck would have it, Joseph's father died, and Joseph was called back to Tunisia before his Jedi training was finished. So Maimonides decides the way he's going to finish his training is by writing a book. And he writes this book. The book is known in English as the Guide for the Perplexed. It's a letter to Joseph telling him, here are the philosophical arguments and principles we didn't get to do in person, but I want you to master them so that you can carry on after me the philosophical defense of the Jewish faith whenever it's attacked by Christians, by Muslims, or by atheism. And we have this book. It was written in Arabic, translated into Hebrew very soon after it was written, and now there's actually a pretty good English translation that's available to us all. It's a very complicated book. For a guide to the perplexed, it's a pretty perplexing book. I mean, you could have written it easier. But you see, he wrote it that way on purpose, because he didn't want just anybody reading it. He wanted you reading it. The Guide for the Perplexed is really a philosophical manual. It's a philosophical map of how to get from here to truth. For Maimonides, Judaism is not a religion. Judaism is not an identity. Judaism is not an ethnicity. Judaism is not a community. Judaism is truth. Or to put it the other way around, what Maimonides was interested in is truth. And he didn't care where it came from. Scientific truth has to be part of our faith. Truth from another religion, if you could prove that it's true, has to be part of our faith. The purpose of life is not to be Jewish. The purpose of life is to live a life dedicated to the acquisition of truth. Truth is what this is all about. So the first question for our holidays that Maimonides might ask us is, what's the truth of your life? What's the truth that's at the core of your life? Many, many times, those of you who have been cursed to be part of this synagogue for some time have heard this sermon. Many times I've told you to do this. This time of year, write a letter. Write a letter to the people that matter most to you in the world. If you have kids, grandkids, write it to them. You got friends, write it to them. Can't find anybody, write it to me. I'll be happy to read it. Write a letter and put in that letter everything life has taught you. That's all. What is the truth of your life? What is the meaning, the Torah, the lesson of your life? What did you learn from growing up in the house of your parents? What did you learn from all your years in school? What did you learn from your work in the world, from your successes? More than that, what have you learned from your failures? What have you learned from the relationships you've had in your life? Those of you who have had the experience of being married, those who've had the experience of being divorced, those who've had the experience of having children, grandchildren, having young people in your life, those who've had the experience of burying loved ones. What has life taught you? Put it in a letter. Do this for 3 reasons. 1, so you'll know. There are 5,840 verses in the Bible, in the Torah, all handwritten. About 300,000 individually written, handwritten letters in a Torah scroll. According to tradition, if any one letter is missing, even the smallest yud, the entire Torah is puzzle. You can't use it. You can't use it. You have to put it away till it gets fixed. Now that is a great example of Jewish obsessive compulsive disease. But it has a meaning. It has a meaning. Because according to the tradition, every letter in the Torah stands for one of us. Each one of us has been sent into the world with one letter, one word, one phrase, one sentence of God's message. If any one of us fails to deliver his or her truth, the entire message is indecipherable. You own a truth. You know truth. You don't know you know truth because the world has convinced you don't know anything. But I'm telling you, you know truth. What you need to do is sit down in a quiet, safe place and think about what life has taught you and what you would like to share with those behind you, beyond you. Write down your truth. You need to know it. You deserve to know it. That's number 1. Louise, could I get a glass of water? Louise? Rigo, bring me a glass of water. Number 2. The second reason I want you to do this is for the people you love. Actually, it's very selfish. It's for me. I'm a rabbi in a congregation. I do a lot of weddings. I love weddings. I Do a lot of baby namings. I love baby namings. I do a lot of funerals. Too many. When I do a funeral service, I gather a family together, and I ask them only one question. Tell me about your loved one. What was the truth of her life? What was the truth of his life? And I ask people to reflect on this. Most of the time, I get beautiful answers. I get wonderful answers. People talk to me about their values and commitments, about relationships, about accomplishments. But you'd be surprised how many times they don't know. What was the truth of your loved one's life? I told you this famous story. This is a true story. I get a call from a young man, asks me to do a funeral for his father. He's not a member of the synagogue, but he lives in Encino, and I sort of think of myself as the neighborhood rabbi, right? I said, okay, I'll help you with it. Where do you live? Gives me an address. We agreed to meet. I drive up into the Encino Hills, a beautiful home. I walk into this home. It's 3 adult men. It's their father who died. We sit down at the kitchen table. And I said to them, tell me about your dad. What was important to him? Long silence. And then finally, one of the sons, he volunteers. Golf. Golf, I say. Golf is fine. Golf is wonderful. Golf is valuable. What were his values? What did your dad live for? What motivated him? Now they're all unanimous. Golf. Dad lived for golf. That's what Dad loved, golf. And now I look around the house. You know, you can learn a lot about people by looking at how they decorate their house. This house was decorated in a style called early Tiger Woods. You know, it was sort of all forest green, and it had golf trophies and golf pictures and golf books on the coffee table. And I'm looking around, and by God, the house is decorated, you know, in the Byron Nelson style. I mean, it's unbelievable. I tried one more time. Did your dad and mom have any dreams about life? Oh, yes. They wanted to live on a golf course on the 14th tee. They were all ready to move when Dad had his heart attack. Now, let me tell you a secret. This is an inside secret. You can't repeat this. It's not that hard to do a Jewish golf funeral because 18 is high. So he played his 18, and now he got the hole-in-one he always wanted. Please rise for the memorial prayer. It's not so hard to do. But as I'm doing this, I'm asking myself a question. Is it true that this man's life was entirely golf? Or did this man have poetry in his soul? Did he have philosophy? Did he have charities that he supported, causes that mattered to him? Did he live with a sense of mission, but failed to communicate that to his adult sons? And what a tragedy that he didn't have the time or the ability or the mechanism or the medium to be able to say to his sons, this is what I live for. I don't want that to happen to you. So write a letter to your loved ones, give them a copy, but put a copy somewhere I can find it. Or the rabbi who follows me. Put it in your drawer, under your socks or underpants. That way we can find it. Because on the day we want to say goodbye to you in the world, and it shouldn't be for a long time, but when that day comes, what a gift to those you love to be able to say, here's what my mother, here's what my father, here's what my uncle, here's what my friend stood for. That's the second reason to do it. And the third reason to do it is because if you do that, you will begin to understand what we guys mean by religion. Because this is what religion is. I would love to be able to tell you that I am in possession of books that fell from heaven, or that an angel came one night and dictated them to me. I don't believe that. I believe that what I'm in possession of are holy books that are the collected letters of our ancestors. They wrote letters to their children and to their children's children, and we have them. They lived and they suffered and they struggled and they celebrated and they sang and they danced and they wrote down the wisdom that they wrestled out of life. And that's what makes a holy book. That's what makes Torah. That's what makes the Machzor, the Siddur, the Megillah. That's what makes the Haggadah. That's what our holy books are. They are godly because they come from the deepest personal place of these people's lives. That's what makes them holy. And you have a right to join that conversation. But this way you'll understand what you're reading when you open a holy book. You're reading a love letter from your ancestors. Please please, please don't forget these details of how to live a life. Maimonides was one of these guys who believed that human life should be lived with deliberation and intention and reflection, and that there should be a truth at the core of your life. A truth at the core of your life. Now, here's the truth at the core of his life. He fell in love with the power of reason. So the first part of the Guide for the Perplexed is a vocabulary lesson. It's a glossary of all the words in the Bible that might give you trouble. And he begins with this one. Part 1, chapter 1. Everybody ready? Are you good? He wants to begin. Remember that verse at the 26th, 27th verse of the first chapter of Genesis. God says, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And then it says God made man in his image after his likeness. So what is the idea of the image of God? Well, that's already a radical idea if you think about it. That you're not allowed to make an image of God, right? That's what the second commandment says, second of the 10, right? But you're not allowed to make an image of God. But there is one image in the world, which is human beings. But the question is, what part of us reflects God? Now, there were people who thought that if the Torah said man is made in God's image, that means God must look like us. I hope it doesn't look like me. I mean, Scarlett Johansson maybe, but not me, right? I mean, does God have a nose? Does God have toes? Does God have arms? Does God have legs? There were people who thought so. Maybe bigger than ours, but people who thought so. Maimonides said, that's nonsense. God can't have a body, because if God has a body, that body has limits. And if a body has limits, that's not God. God's infinite. So what does the Torah mean by image of God? This is an interesting idea, by the way. Where do you find the divinity within a human being? Right? Is it, for example, the human being's ability to love? Or the human being's ability to create? Or the human being's ability to care? Or the human being's ability to change? You'll find that all over Jewish philosophy. Here's the Rambam. Rambam is his initials, by the way. Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, RMBM, Rambam. Okay? You can figure out what your rabbi initials would be. Ready? He says, people have thought that the Hebrew word image denotes a shape and configuration of a thing, but that's not true, he said. That's silly. He said, for they thought that God has man's form, his shape and configuration. The doctrine of corporeality of God was a necessary conclusion. That means that God has a body. He said, no, nonsense, right? That's nonsense. It can't be. They accordingly believed it and deemed that if they abandoned this belief, they'd prove the Bible text false. So now he's going to do a really interesting move. In the very first paragraph of the book, he's going to say, if I read something in the Bible that does not correspond with what I know from common sense, the Bible's wrong. Or rather, my reading of the Bible is wrong. I have to read it differently because my religion has to make sense. My religion has to make sense. You're going to hear this over and over again in him. If you give me religion and it doesn't make sense, either common sense, logical sense, or moral sense, I'm offended. And offended, by the way, is the right word. He gets pissed. You'll see that in a few minutes. I mean, he's just not like, I reject it. He's not British, you know. Well, I used to think British. I used to think British people were well-controlled. Then I've been watching Parliament all week. Have you been watching Parliament this week? Hysterical. Who knew that Parliament could turn into the World Wrestling Federation? They're screaming at each other, yelling at each other, insulting. I'm so happy. Right? It makes me feel a little bit better about what goes on in our country and in Israel and all over the world. You know, these buttoned-down British people. These buttoned-down British people turn into... Anyway, it's got to make sense. It's got to make sense. Think about that for a minute. Religion has to make sense. Don't tell me to put my common sense into a drawer because God said so. God never contradicts truth, ever. Don't tell me to put my moral sense in a drawer because the Bible says so. The Bible needs to make moral sense. You're reading it wrong. So what does he say? He says we have to refute this idea and we have to read every reference to God's face or arm or finger as a metaphor. Because otherwise we end up with a God we can't believe in. And here's his answer. So look at the third paragraph. The Bible's phrase, Let us make man in our image pointed to the specific form of a human being, which is intellectual capacity, not shape or configuration. Man possesses something unique, not found anything else that exists under heaven, namely intellectual capacity. In the exercise of this, no sense, no part of the body, none of the extremities is used. Therefore, the capacity was likened to God's capability, which does not require an instrument. In reality, the human intellect is really not like God's. It just sort of approximates it. Because you can think. Because you can imagine. Because you can imagine logically, and because you have conscience, you are godlike. Look, you knew this. I've told you this many, many times. I'll tell you one more time. I'm not a scientist, but I know one thing about science. There have been dogs on this planet for 100 million years. And in 100 million years of doggy history, no dog ever woke up in the morning and said meow. Not one. Not one. You can teach an old dog new tricks, but you can't teach a dog to be anything but a dog. Why? Because on the day your doggy was born, he or she was already invested with all of his personality, character, and destiny. It's hardwired into the dog. It's called instinct. I didn't have to teach my doggy how to eat, how to drink. I had to teach him where to poop. Pooping, he got well. Where to poop, I had to teach him. But my doggy didn't have a choice about being a doggy. You and I wake up every morning and we have a choice. Who do you want to be today? What do you want to be today? What is the nature of your character? Maimonides is going to insist that part of the intellectual capability of human beings is complete, free, moral choice. Nothing compels you when it comes to your character. You may have constitutional tendencies. Some of us are more generous and some of us are more stingy. Some of us are generally happy people and some of us are generally unhappy people. Some of us are more contemplative and some of us are more outgoing. But all of us have freedom to choose what we're going to do in the next moment and how we're going to be in the world. And therefore, you have complete responsibility for the person you are. You can never say, the devil made me do it. You can never, unless you're completely mentally ill, in which case you're not part of the human community anymore. We lock you up in a nice, quiet place, right? You have complete, and therefore you have complete responsibility for the character that you are. That's the premise of the whole moral tradition. We make moral choices, and we're responsible for the choices we are. And each of us, the character that we bear, is the accumulation of all of our choices. That's part of the image of God that lives inside of you, lives inside of everyone. So what's the purpose of religion? The purpose of religion is to teach you how to live the best life you can possibly live. And it has to make sense. Look at the next paragraph. There are people who find it difficult to give a reason for any of the commandments. I don't know how many of you know this, but Judaism has a lot of stuff you got to do. 2 sets of dishes, Pesach dishes, Shabbos candles, Hanukkah candles, Hamantash. I mean, when you make a list, it's a lot of chazarai. I mean, a lot of stuff, right? Every one of them has to make... You have a right, he says, to ask, Rabbi, why are we doing this? And keep asking the rabbi, why are we doing this? Until you get an answer that makes sense. And the only answer that makes sense is an answer that says, to shape and form you morally. That's what all the commandments are about. If you find a commandment and it either doesn't shape you morally or it misshapes you morally, don't do it. Seriously. And you've never heard a rabbi say not to do something Jewish, right? But you know what? There are things in the Bible that can turn you into a racist if you don't know how to deal with them. And if you find racism, don't do it. Seriously, don't do it. This is what he says. There are people who find it difficult to give a reason for any commandment and consider it right to assume that the commandments and prohibitions have no rational basis. He would go nuts over those teachers who say, well, it says so, so therefore I have to do it. That's nonsense. That's an abdication of your moral sensibility and your rational sensibility. He'd go crazy. Crazy. They are led to adopt this theory by a certain disease in their soul. I told you he'd get pissed. They're nuts. That's what he meant. That's a translation from the Arabic, right? The existence of which they perceive, but which they are unable to discuss or describe. For they imagine that these commandments, if they were useful in any respect, were commanded because of their usefulness, would seem to originate in the thought of some intelligent being. But as things are not reasonable and serve no purpose, they undoubtedly come from God. There's this idea that if it's reasonable, it can't be religious, and if it's religious, it has to be super reasonable. And my mind said, what? Why would you do that? Why would you give up your moral sensibility? You wouldn't give up your moral sensibility for a government that told you to do stuff like that. You wouldn't give it up for any authority that told. Why would you give it up for religion? He says that's silly. According to this theory of those weak-minded persons, I told you, he's really like ruthless in this. So don't, man is more perfect than his creator. For what man says or does has a certain objects, while the actions of God are different. What he commands us to do has of no use, and forbids us to do what is harmless. Surely God is greater than this. On the contrary, the sole object of law is to benefit us. So from Maimonides, the only question you get to ask is this: what kind of person does this particular religious gesture create? That's the great moral basis of all of religious life. And that's what he urges us to do. That's what he wants us to do. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter. You ready? Ready? Here's the answer to the question you came with today. For Maimonides, the purpose of life is to gain knowledge of God. To gain knowledge of God, you have to know everything about everything about everything. Because God created everything, so the only way to know everything about God is to gain knowledge of everything. Physics, cultures, history, languages, mathematics, rhetoric, everything. And once you know everything about everything, you will slowly gain a knowledge of God. That's the great process. So he tells his student, go learn everything. And then from learning everything, you'll learn God. Because you will understand where God fits in the world. For Maimonides, the great task of life is to gain knowledge of God, which means to gain a knowledge of everything. An understanding of everything, a wisdom about how everything works in the world. And for him, the great symbol of this is Moses ascending the mountain. Maimonides was obsessed with Moses. First of all, it's his namesake, right? His name is Moses. And he modeled his life after Moses. Moses was a teacher, Maimonides was a teacher. Moses was a healer, Maimonides was a healer. Moses was a thinker, Maimonides was a thinker. And just like Moses is ascending the mountain to gain truth from God, Maimonides spends his life ascending the mountain to gain truth from God. And just as it was his aspiration to stand where Moses stood, face to face with God, that's what life is all about. Perfect the capacity to think clearly and gain a perception of the absolute truths that rule the universe. Only one problem in all of this that vexed him, that he couldn't figure out. Moses goes up the mountain, which Maimonides says is a metaphor for the self-realization and the perfection of a human being. And he stands face to face with God, which to him is the climax. It's the goal. It's the apotheosis of everything human. And then Moses comes down the mountain. He comes down the mountain. Back to us. Back to all of us schleppers. Back to all of our screaming and our yelling and our tsuris and our triviality and our problems and our rivalries and our conflicts and our whining and our complaining and our complaining and our whining. He comes down the mountain to us to bring us God's word. Why did he come down the mountain? Why not stay at the top of the mountain? If the apotheosis, if the goal and climax of human existence is to gain the ultimate truth of God, stay up on the damn mountain. Why do you want to come down to a bunch of schleppy people, especially Jews, who are just always whining and complaining? Stay up there. Why do you want to come down? And by the way, this isn't the only religion that asked that question. And if you've ever had experience in other faiths, the Buddha gains Buddha consciousness. Gaining Buddha consciousness, he should have stayed in nirvana, Machaya. Nirvana is the Buddhist word for Machaya. Machaya is the Yiddish word for nirvana. Are we understanding each other now? Right? Stay there. Why do you want to come down and teach people who are full of anger and rage and selfishness and avarice and envy and jealousy and materialism and bodily appetites? Why do you? But the Bodhisattva is the Buddha who comes back and says, I have something to share with you. Maimonides spent his whole life trying to figure out the answer to this question. Why does Moses come down the mountain? And he doesn't tell the whole book. The book is like 800 pages long. He doesn't tell you. The whole book is about how to go up the mountain. 799 pages of how to get up the mountain, to face God. And on the last page, on the last paragraph, on the last page, he says, okay, I got the answer now. I'm going to give you the answer. You wait 799 and a half pages going up the mountain, and this is what he says. It's on the third page of my booklet here, and it says, Part 3, Chapter 54. Everybody good about this? So before we read this, I want you to assume that you have just read 799 pages of the Guide for the Perplexed in Arabic, because that's the only way to understand this. Everybody cool with that? Right? When your friends say, you learned the Guide for the Perplexed? You say, yeah, all 799 pages of it. The ancient and modern philosophers have shown, excuse the sexist language, but he wrote in this way, but so just man means human, that man can acquire 4 kinds of perfection. Page 3, second paragraph. Effie, you find it? Yeah, see it? Yeah, it's part 3, chapter 54. Perfection means this is something we should look for, we should strive for, because the object of life is to achieve this kind of perfection. So there's 4 kinds of perfections, and he's going to give them to us in the order of their popularity. What's the most popular thing most people try to do with their lives? Say what? Get stuff. Exactly right. Right? Get stuff. Okay, good. Good. It's actually even, to get stuff. The first kind, the lowest, he says, don't take that for granted, don't take that personally, is acquisition, which people spend their days, is perfection as regards to property. So the first kind is, I want to get as rich as Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. That's what I want. And think about how much time most people spend, right, getting stuff. I mean, seriously. Think about how much effort people put into getting a living, right? The possession of money, garments, furniture, servants' land, and the like. The possession of the title of a great king belongs to this class. But here's the problem. What's the problem with making getting stuff the purpose of your life? First of all, let me start with that. Is there something evil in getting stuff? No. I want to make this very clear. Judaism, unlike other religions we could name, does not frown upon the acquisition or pursuit of wealth. There is no statement in the Jewish tradition that says a rich man gets into heaven just like a camel goes through the eye of a needle. That's the guys across the street. You are permitted, more than that, you are obligated to make a living in Jewish faith. What were my obligations vis-a-vis my children? According to the Torah, I have to feed them, clothe them, and protect them, and teach them a trade. Also teach them to swim. That's another story. I have to teach my kid a trade. The acquisition of wealth is not evil, especially if you make frequent contributions to the synagogue. Did I make that clear enough? No, seriously. I want to make this very clear. It's very important to understand this. There's nothing wrong with wealth. There's nothing evil about wealth. There's nothing even evil about the pursuit of wealth. As long as that's not the purpose of your existence. As long as you understand that wealth is an instrument, not an inherent goal of life. Wealth becomes an idol when it's what you worship. But if you say, I want to get wealth because I want to protect my family, that's fine. I want to get wealth because there are things in the world I want to accomplish. I want to learn. I want to travel. I want to grow myself. That's fine. I want to get wealth because I want to do justice in the world. I want to protect the poor and the sick and the bereft. Without the commercial, I want to protect the institutions that nurture my community and teach our children. Yes, that's righteousness. That's why it's called tzedakah. You can't do tzedakah unless you got wealth. Tzedakah means not charity, righteousness. You need wealth for that. So there's nothing wrong with the pursuit of wealth as long as it's an instrument to achieve higher goals. Maimonides says the problem with making wealth the object of your life, the perfection that you're obsessed with, is because there's no connection between possessor and possessions. Because he whose sole aim in all his exertions and endeavors is the possession of this kind of perfection seeks imaginary transient things. They don't give him any kind of perfection. Because the stock market will fall the day after tomorrow and all your wealth is going to be gone. And you still don't have a reason to live. It's an idol if you make it the sole reason you're alive. Nothing wrong with it, but it's instrumental. Is that clear? It leads to other goals. Let's do the second one. What's the second thing that most people want? What's the second thing most people want? The genie comes in your life and says, I give you 3 wishes. So the first one is, I wish for $1 million. Okay, fine. Genie says, you should raise your sights, ask for 20 million, but okay, fine. You're not an NFL wide receiver if you're asking for $1 million, right? Now, what's the second thing most people want? The second kind of perfection is more closely related to man's body than the first. It includes the perfection of the shape, constitution, and form of man's body, the moderation of temperaments, the proper order and strength of his limbs, the kind of perfection which must likewise be excluded from forming our chief aim. The second kind of perfection is health. I want to be healthy. I want my body to be strong and well. Let me live a long time. Right? I want to be able to be in control of my physical desires, because if I'm not in control of my physical desires, I'm going to be a slave to them. Right? I want to be a slave to them. And once again, I want to point this out because it's very important you get this. Physical desires are not evil in Judaism. Physical desire, physical pleasure, physical existence is not a sin in Judaism. Judaism never held sex to be original sin. It's not. Sex is a joyful celebration of the pleasure of the body as long as it's done responsibly with the person you're attached to. You're responsible for it. It's got to be done with responsibility. And responsibility, the tradition always understood, had to do with marriage, with sustained caring for each other. But in the bonds of marriage, in the bonds of a sustained, responsible relationship, sexual joy is a mitzvah. A mitzvah, according to the ketubah that you got on the day of your wedding, he owes you sexual joy. If he's not giving it to you, roll up the ketubah and whack him over the head with it till he gives it to you. Seriously, that's an amazing thing. The body is not an enemy of the spirit. The body is a container, a vessel for the spirit. Developing the body makes the vessel stronger. That's good. It's not the reason you're alive. That's the problem. Right? If equinox becomes your temple, people used to call it Bali's Beth Shalom, right? If that becomes your temple, you're in the wrong building. Because it's an instrumental good. It gives you the capacity to pursue other goods. It's not the highest good all on its own. So go and pursue good health. Take care of yourself. Get some exercise. Enjoy a nice chocolate malted once in a while. God gave you chocolate malted. There's a beautiful Gemara, a beautiful piece of the Talmud. It says when you die, the first question God asks you in heaven is why you didn't enjoy all the pleasures of life. God's going to say, I gave you Ben and Jerry, and you ate frozen yogurt? I gave you Maui, and you live in Tarzana? What the hell is wrong with you, right? What? Like, what's wrong? I gave you sunsets, and you sat in your office? What's wrong with you? Get out there and eat ice cream. Not too much, but just, enjoy it. You're supposed to enjoy these things. That's the second perfection. So Maimonides says most people pursue that. It's wrong as the goal of your life. It's okay as an instrument to higher goals. Now we're going to get really dicey. What's number 3? Listen to number 3. The third kind of perfection is moral perfection. The highest degree of excellence in one's character. Now, I would have thought that would have been the highest of the highest, right? Righteousness. Righteousness is the highest thing. But he says no. Once again, righteousness is valuable. Very, very, very valuable. But it's instrumental to higher goals. Why? Because first of all, it's not for you, it's for us. Righteousness is social justice. It's got to be pursued in a community. You imagine Robinson Crusoe on the island all by himself. I'm good. I've got more water than I can deal with. Robinson Crusoe, thank you. Robinson Crusoe doesn't need morality. There's no one else to use it for, right? Morality only allows you to live the life you want to live. So moral perfection, like the body's perfection, like the perfection of acquisition of possessions, is valuable, but only instrumental to a higher goal. So now you're saying, okay, come on, Rabbi, 799 3/4 pages, tell me the damn goal of life. That's what I came for tonight. Now I'll read it in Arabic. No, I won't do that too. The fourth kind of perfection, this is it. This is the one you've been waiting for. Ready? The fourth kind of perfection is the true perfection of man. This is the real goal of life. This is the reason you're alive. This is what life is supposed to be devoted to. The possession of the highest intellectual faculties. The possession of such knowledge which leads to true knowledge of God. With this perfection, man has obtained his final object. The true perfection, it remains to him alone. It gives him immortality, and on its account he is called man. Your aim must therefore, he's talking to his student, your aim must be to attain this fourth perfection. So what's the highest goal of life, says Maimonides? Knowledge, wisdom, understanding. To understand how the world is put together, to understand how human society is put together, to understand how human beings are put together. Because if you understand all of that, you will understand how God inhabits the world. This to him is the highest human perfection. And for him, everything previous to that is instrumental to reach this. Why do I have possessions? So I have time to sit and learn. Why do I perfect the body? So my body doesn't disturb my learning. Why do I have more moral perfection? So I live in a society that's at peace. And I can live in a culture that's at peace. And they'll give me the peace and allow me to go seek my intellectual perfection. I can seek God. I can be with God. For him, the intellectual experience and the mystical experience meet. I want to be with God. And now he says, and that's why the prophet agrees with the philosophers. So he says to his student, the prophets have explained these things to us and have expressed the same opinion on them as the philosophers. Imagine that. When it comes to its apotheosis, what is the meaning of life? The revelation and reason come to the same conclusions. Same conclusions. And he quotes the prophet Jeremiah. He says, they say distinctly that perfection, property, and health or in character is not a perfection worthy to be sought as a cause of pride and glory for us. That the knowledge of God, true wisdom, is the only perfection which we should seek and which we should glorify ourselves. Jeremiah, referring to these four kinds of perfection, says, and here's the verse in Jeremiah, and look how much it corresponds to what he just told us, right? Thus says the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom. That's number, right? 3, right? Not the strong, no, it's number 4. Let not the strong man glory in his strength. Let not the rich man glory in his riches. But only this should one glory, in his earnest devotion to me. So number 3, 2, 1. Let not the wise man glory in his moral wisdom. Let not the rich man glory in his possessions. Let not the strong man glory in his power. But what is life for? That they should all come close to me, says God. Well, there you have it. There you have it. Now you know the answer. Now you know why you came. You came here tonight to learn that the highest glory of a human being, the purpose of human life, what you should spend the rest of your life doing is contemplating God and getting close to God. Yeah? except for one small problem. That's not all the prophet said. The prophet goes on to say, "For I, the Lord, act with kindness, righteousness, and justice in the world. For in these I delight." And Maimonides says, wait a minute. See how the prophet arranged these perfections and according to their estimation in the eyes of the multitude? Right? Most people seek possessions. Some people seek health. Some people prize moral wisdom. The rich man occupies the first, the next is the mighty man, and then the wise man, that is the man of good moral principles. For in the eyes of the multitude who are addressed in these words, he is like a great man. There's a reason why these classes are in this order. But the prophet does not content himself with explaining the knowledge of God is the highest kind of perfection. He says that man can attain glory in the knowledge of God and in the knowledge of his ways and attributes, which are his actions. We are thus told in the passage that the divine acts which ought to be known and ought to serve as guides for our action are chesed, mishpat, and tzedakah, kindness, justice, and righteousness. The object of the passage, therefore, is to declare that the perfection in which man can truly glory is attained by him when he has acquired as far as possible for man the knowledge of God, the knowledge of God's providence, and of the manner in which God brings creatures into being and governs them. Having acquired this knowledge, the perfect man will then be determined always to seek loving kindness, justice, and righteousness to imitate the ways of God. Woo! What did he just say? He said, look, I spent 799 pages trying to convince you that the purpose of life is to seek a knowledge of God. When I get to the last paragraph, that last line of the last paragraph, on the last page, I bring you this verse from Jeremiah. And he says exactly the same thing I did. Most people want to get possessions. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not a life. Most people want to get bodily health and strength and pleasure and fun. Not a problem, but that's not a life. Some people are out for moral perfection. That's wonderful. But even that's not a life. The purpose of life is to gain a knowledge of God. Except there's a layer higher than that. What do you do once you've got a knowledge of God? Once you get the knowledge of God, you've got to come down the mountain. You're not allowed to sit on top of the mountain. You've got to come down to the mountain and bring with you the attributes, the characteristics, the character traits, the way of living that God has taught you. And what are those? Righteousness, justice, and kindness. You've got to bring that back to the world. Moses could have stayed on top of the mountain, but he didn't. Because that's what's really expected of a human being. To live the godly life. To live the godly life. But to live it with a deliberation and intention of a person who really takes it seriously. And my job in the world is to do what needs to be done at this moment. And what needs to be done at every moment is to inject these qualities of kindness, justice, and righteousness into my interactions with people, into my words, into my actions, into life. There's a beautiful Hasidic story, much, much later. This is 12th century. In the 18th, 19th century, you have the Hasidim, the great mystical tradition of Eastern Europe. The tradition of a particular mystic. It's a particular mystic. And he spends every afternoon in mystic revelation. He sits in a trance in his bedroom, and his mind and his soul soar to the highest heights. And he's worked his whole life to get to the highest heights. The highest heights. The highest heights of heaven. And the story is that one afternoon, after a lifetime of fasting and praying and learning and discipline and living a life, he finally makes it. He bursts through the last gate. And there he is, standing face to face with God. And at that very moment, his grandson, infant grandson, who's in the next room, starts crying. And there he is standing face to face in God's throne room. And the baby's in the other bedroom. Ah! And God looks at him and says, "No, what are you going to do?" Isn't that a great story? What are you going to do? God says, "God, what are you going to do? I want to know." And the poor rabbi, he's spent his whole lifetime trying to get to this point of mystical joy, mystical union with divinity, mystic face to face with God. And God says, "Okay, what are you going to do?" And he shrugs his shoulders and says, "I have to go." And God says, "Good." And he goes down, 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 and picks up the baby and comforts the baby. God says, "You did right." You can come to that moment of religious ecstasy, but religious ecstasy, says Maimonides, has to lead to moral commitment, to an interaction with human beings in the world, in this world, in all of its schmutz. And trust me, I know all the schmutz. I mean, I watch CNN like you do. Hell, I watch ESPN. I know more schmutz than you do, right? If you've been watching the news and sports this week, it's even schmutzier than the news. I mean, schmutz is a technical moral word in Latin that means moral depredation. You know, and you say to yourself, like, why would a religious person want to dip his toe into this? Like, get out of it. Make the synagogue a haven from all of that. And God says, "No, go take care of the baby." That's what we're here to do. That's what we're here to do. That's what we're here to do. All right, one last thought, and then I think it's time to go home before we get stuck in the port. So Maimonides has a beautiful image that you should keep in mind as you enter this holiday. For those of you who have page 4, turn to page 4. So this set of texts comes from Mishnah Torah, and this is from the Laws of Repentance. And if you look down at number 7 at the bottom of my page, and this will finish with this, okay? Right? It is necessary that everyone throughout the year should regard him or herself as if we were half innocent or half guilty. So here's the image. There's a giant scale, and all of your mitzvahs, all of your merits, all the good stuff you ever did in your life is heaped up on one side. And all of your sins, all of your transgressions, all of your shortcomings, all of your flaws are heaped up on the other side. And Yom Kippur comes, and guess what? It balances perfectly. Perfectly. Right? Why? If then he commits one more sin, he presses down the scale of guilt against himself, and not just himself, because the whole world stands with all of its mitzvahs on one side and all of its sins on the other, and you decide the fate of all humanity. All humanity is waiting for you. And your next act is going to determine the fate of all humanity. And there it is, right? And if he fulfills one commandment, if you do one act of goodness, you turn the scale of merit to his favor in the whole world and bring salvation and deliverance to all his fellow creatures and himself. Your next act determines the fate of the whole world. You better be really careful the way you talk to the parking lot attendant tonight. He could be, the Messiah waiting, right? That's it, right? Now, why half and half? Why half and half? Now think about this for a second. Why half and half? Because if I told you, as some traditions do, that you are inveterately evil, that you were born into original sin, that everything you do is sinful, that there's no way for man or woman to escape from the sinful nature of their creatureliness, then you will say to yourself, "Oh, what the hell? What the hell? What difference does it make?" Right? Right? My dear brother, who I love deeply, is a psychologist. He had a PhD from UCLA in health psychology, and his first practice was in he and a partner owned an obesity clinic. So my brother would talk to people, and he said one of the biggest problems is when they just give up. Right? You've got to believe that giving up the ice cream cone is going to make a difference, because if you think of yourself as a fat person, and then it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter, right? So he said, you got to think of yourself as like half and half, right? So if I tell you you're inveterately sinful, you'll say, screw it. I'm going to be, I'll be a terrible person because it seems to be that you get ahead by being a terrible person, right? Right? Then on the other side, if I tell you, no, you're a good person. You're completely good. Everything you do is good. You're a righteous, good person. Great Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Remember Jean-Jacques Rousseau? Wrote a book called Émile, where he said, every child is innocent and pure, like a flower growing from the cracks of the sidewalk. That's because Jean-Jacques Rousseau never worked in a Jewish summer camp. I can tell you, because I worked in a Jewish summer camp, that the meanest, most vicious, ruthless creature on this planet is not the anaconda of the Amazon. It's not the great blue shark. It's not the silverback gorilla of Africa. It's not the Bengal tiger or the polar bear. The most vicious creature on this planet is a bunk of 11-year-old girls. Because what they do on the first day of camp is choose one of them at random and then eat her to death over the course of a summer. Pick, 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 pick. And there's nothing you can do about it. Better to wrestle a shark than try to discipline a group of 11-year-old girls. So if I tell you that you're all evil, you won't try to do good. If I tell you that you're all good, you won't notice the evil that you do. Because when I call those mothers, my daughter, are you kidding? My little Bubele, my little Shane, my little Rochele, my little Yehudis, your little mamzer. I mean, I'm telling you, no, my child is perfect. Your camp is flawed. Yes, that's true, madam, but you're kidding. That's right, right? I know where the kid got it from, that's right. So what do you have to do? You have to be morally balanced. Because if you're morally balanced, then you really are motivated to look at your next action. And to understand that your action has an implication far beyond the bounds of your own personal morality. You're changing the world. The world Maimonides offers us is a world that's like the surface of a still pond. Throw one pebble and the ripples go and go and go, and you don't know where the ripples go. A pebble of righteousness brings ripples everywhere, but a pebble of evil brings ripples everywhere. This is a beautiful teaching, but then I heard a better one. So my dear friend and teacher, Rabbi Mark Borowitz, who's the spiritual leader of Beit Tshuva, offered a gloss on the Rambam, which is really chutzpahdik. But if you know Mark, it makes a lot of sense, right? Mark said, no. 50-50, no. 49-51. See, 50-50, you're just going to look at your next act. But if I tell you you're 49% good and 51% rotten, I need 2% change. Nobody changes 180 degrees. My brother taught me this. My brother did a big study because he went into the field and he studied weight loss. He says it's easy to lose a lot of weight. What's the hard part? Keeping it off. You can put a person on a certain kind of diet and bam, they lose 100 pounds in 6 months. But the moment they start eating again, they lose it and 20% more. And I can tell you that I've lost 50 pounds 100 times. I mean, I've lost 6 different people, right? Keeping it off. So what do you need to do? 2%. You don't tell somebody to give up all their eating habits. You tell them a 2% change. So, dear friends, I don't want you to change. I like you the way you are. I love you all. I just want 2%. Can you do 2%? Can you be 2% kinder to the people who live in your house? Could you give me 2% more tzedakah to support the community, to take care of the poor and the needy? Can you put 2% more time into nurturing your own soul this year? 2% time into learning a little Torah? 2% time into cultivating your own morality and goodness? 2% time into cultivating yourself as a person? Could you be 2% better this year? That's all I need, 2%. 2 out of 100, 2%. How about 10 minutes a week? 2%. Because if you can do 2%, you can change 49.51 to 51.49. And who knows, if you give me 2% this year, I'm coming back next year and asking for another 2%. And then 2% after that. And pretty soon it's the miracle of compound interest. Pretty soon you'll be thin and happy and wonderful. Thanks for coming tonight. Take care.